Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the webinar. It's right at the top of the hour, 3 o'clock here on the East Coast of the States. We're going to get started here and go ahead and kick this off. I know we've got a few more people trickling in, but we'll get through some of the housekeeping stuff first. So you can see some of the things on there. We want you to be social as part of this. Please don't be shy about taking screenshots and being social and sharing what you hear about in here. So this is a pretty new session for us, one that I've kind of developed out of a lot of my conversations with clients, with our prospects, and talking to different people. And so I hope there's some good things in here. If you've been on any of my sessions before, you'll know that I really like to give some nuggets of information within the webinar. I know that not everything in here will be applicable to everything that you're doing, but I also know that hopefully you'll get a few nuggets out of here that you can take away, maybe a couple aha moments, and we'll go with that. So please feel free to ask questions during the webinar. Always love your questions, love your feedback, and want to be engaged with you as well. I'd already mentioned some of the hashtags. Please be social. Don't feel shy about doing that as well. So real quick, for those that don't know me, my name is Curtis Hughes. I'm one of the managing partners and co-founders here at C5 Insight. You can see my contact info there on the in the middle of the screen. And on the far right side, kind of my focus, where I spend a lot of my time. So a lot of my time is spent around collaboration, digital workplace initiatives, intranets fall into that, things like that. A lot around employee engagement, adoption. How are we getting people to use the technology? And you'll hear me talk about that theme throughout the webinar. How are people going to work in the future? How are people changing? How are our organizations changing? Spend a lot of time there. So all those will kind of be shown a little bit throughout the presentation, but that's where I spend most of my time. So what I want to do first, before we get going, just to kind of get a feel for where you guys are in your intranet journey, is we're going to pop up a poll real quick just to kind of gauge where you guys are. If you guys could just take 10-15 seconds, please answer the poll for me, and we'll show the results here. About another 5 or 10 seconds left. Just let us know. If you can't, if one of those doesn't fit your need, pop it into the questions for us. I just like to know so I can know who's in the audience and who I'm talking to at this time. So let's go ahead and see the results of those and kind of see where everybody is with that. All right, good. So it looks like we've got a good mix across those two, and kind of seeing where they are. I mean, a 50-50 right there, some going to SharePoint, some not going to SharePoint, and nobody on SharePoint as their intranet with little or no options. So a good mix, and we'll kind of talk about that, and hopefully there'll be some good information. So let's go back to the presentation, and we'll kind of keep going from here. So the first question, as I was putting this together, as I thought about this, is why do we really need a better intranet, right? That's probably one of your questions as well, maybe when it came up, is why do we really need a better intranet? What's wrong with the intranets we have today? What's going on with them? And I really think there's a lot to this. There's a lot going on inside of our organizations today, and I really feel like a good intranet can bridge the gap between the organization and its employees, and it can also connect employees to each other, and I'll talk about that connection a little later on. But I wanted to share a few areas where I'm seeing this really take shape, and kind of talk through what's going on out there and why we need to start thinking a little bit differently about our intranet. So how many of you guys would say this looks like me, right? You've got all kinds of things going on. You're leaving one meeting, you've got a notification on your phone, you're heading to another meeting, you've got a voicemail and emails to check, all kinds of things, right? We're constantly connected. We've constantly got this digital noise coming at us all the time, and it doesn't really look like collaboration much. It looks more like chaos, right? That we've got all these things happening all around us. So not only do we have to take this into account when we're building our intranets as kind of this platform for our users, because these are the employees, these are the users, this is how our people are, and this is not going to get better, right? We're getting more and more connected and more noise out there. And there was a study that Microsoft did last year that actually said our attention span, because of all this connectedness and we're thinking in 140 characters like Twitter, that our attention spans have actually dropped 25% in the last decade. So officially we now have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. So it's amazing any of you guys are still on the webinar, to be frank. So it's really interesting because we've got to now know that. A lot of people don't go into it. They think about building the same old internet, putting all the same pieces together, but our people are different. We're changing, and how we consume information. And I'll talk about how practically we can address that a little bit later on. The other thing I want to kind of address is that our teams are evolving, right? I mean, this is the future of how we're going to work. I mean, you can see the stats there on the screen. I mean, most of us don't have to work in the office every single day. Most, even large organizations, have telecommuting policies, so we're not required to stay in the office every day. And some say that in the next 3, 4, 5 years, half of all workers won't be coming into an office. So how's that going to change how we're communicating and collaborating with each other? How does an intranet play into that? Can our intranet be the same old intranet, or does it need to do things differently now that we know that all these things are going on? So again, we're part of this new age of working, and we're part of really a new generation of working as well. And speaking of generation, we've got this mix, and you guys have probably heard it you know, beat to death about the millennials, but there's a couple other things I want to point out here. One is that, you know, the stat I used to have in here was 2020. By 2020, 50% of the workforce would be millennials. We just crossed into that this year, actually 4 years before they said we would. So that'll tell you something right there. Now close to 50% of the workforce is millennials. It is actually the largest generation in the workforce right now. All the others are going away. So this is growing really fast, right? So what does that mean? Well, millennials are different, right? Only a third are leaving for money. So most of the millennials that we work with and talk to, I mean, they're leaving because, you know, they want to be involved with something that has a purpose, that has mission behind it. They want to be engaged, and a lot of them want to work with the latest technologies, right? They want things that are thriving and doing new things. And they're walking out the door usually and leaving every 2 or 3 years. And so how are you capturing knowledge using your intranet, making sure that you're leveraging that? And then one of the biggest things, I think, in my opinion, is that in the next, you know, 3, 4, 5 years or so, the next generation is going to be coming out of college and entering the workforce, Gen Z. So for the first time in human history, starting around 2020, we're going to have 5 generations working side by side now, because some people are staying in the workforce longer, people are not retiring till later, and we get Gen Z coming out. So you're going to have 22, 23-year-olds working beside 60-plus-year-olds. I can tell you that your intranet's going to have to be shaped differently, right? They're going to work very differently. Gen Z is going to work so much differently than even the millennials. So how are we going to factor all that in? How are we going to get their attention and keep them engaged? So there's a lot going on. So, you know, a lot of people say, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And these are all great things, right? We know these things are going on, but how do we know our intranet's not really addressing these points, right? I want to show this kind of last stat, and this comes from a Gartner research, and there's a lot of stuff behind here. This is just a couple pieces I picked out. But in my opinion, it is broke, right? So Gartner came out with this study, and it's a long white paper from Carol Roswell. You can go Google it and find it. But basically said that about 80% of social business efforts, intranets, collaboration, SharePoint, those kind of fall into this, will not achieve their intended benefits. So there was this long study that went through why those reasons are, and I've talked about those in other webinars. But needless to say, there's people still failing. We see SharePoint failures upwards of 60, 70%. Gartner has it as high as 80. So something's broke, right? Something's wrong. So now we need to understand, we know kind of why we need a better intranet, and we understand things going on. What can we do about that? What can we do? And I want to spend the balance of the time we have together just talking through what are we going to be able to do to make us have a better intranet. And so I'm hoping you guys will get something out of this. So I'm really a fan of making things easy. I like small nuggets of information, like I said, that you guys can get. So what I want to do first is share 4 strategies that I believe will help you guys build a better intranet. So let's jump into those 4 strategies, and then we'll kind of dive deeper into these as we go along. So when most people think about focusing on their users, they think about branding, user design, those kind of things, right? Focusing on how the users are going to go about it. But you guys have probably heard the term user experience, right? And I want to point out that user experience is much different than user design and user interfaces and branding. The user experience is much more about how is it hard to use? Is it easy to use? How are we going to go about it? Does it make sense? Is that working? Is that quote-unquote in the flow, as we call it a lot of times, with how I'm normally working? Or do I have to stop what I'm doing, go do something else in my intranet, and then come back? Is it difficult to use? And we see a lot of organizations just don't spend enough time putting their users at the center of everything they're doing. And that goes beyond just having kind of a quick assessment meeting and trying to get everybody's wishes and wants and and kind of prioritizing those. It's really understanding how your users work. So are your users mobile? Do you know if they're mobile? How often do they use mobile phones? Do you guys, can you guys answer those kind of questions? Can you guys determine that? I don't know. I mean, one of the stats I read in the last, gosh, it's been this month, I think, was that 50 to 60% of the time when we're in the office, we're actually not at our desk. Now, there's a lot of reasons, and maybe we're doing that, but we're in a lot of meetings, right? Where you saw the stat I had earlier. We're in a ton of meetings, 60+ meetings per month on average. We're mobile, so it's true. I'm doing a lot of work while I'm out doing things, not necessarily sitting at my desk, right? So we're mobile even when we're not mobile, if that makes sense. So mobile is no longer a place and no longer that we're outside the building. We may be using mobile devices and tablets while we're sitting at our desk, right? I mean, Surface and all these kind of things. And also understanding how users work today. I'll talk a little bit later about kind of the org chart and how the org chart is driving or has driven a lot of information about how you navigate and how you organize your sites. And then the last thing I want to mention is we've kind of always had, building your intranets is kind of this grab and go mentality, right? Kind of like this quickie mart where you can kind of go in, get the information you need, and get out. And the most successful intranets we've seen have been ones where they've built a community. People go there, they stay there, they do their work, they keep it up all day, and they're kind of interacting. Those are the intranets that thrive. So trying to get away from this grab-and-go mentality and trying to develop real value that people want to use as they go through this. So in short, really this is what it's about, right? If it's user-centered, it's going to be user-supported. And everything we do when we work with clients to build intranets, we constantly try to make sure we're keeping users at the center of everything we do. We put them right in the center and we draw all these things around them to make sure that exactly what is it that the users need, want, how do they work, because that's who our users are, right? If we build this great intranet and no one uses it, then our value and our return on investment is zero, right? There's no return, no value if no one uses it. And so we want to make sure it's always being used. So, most of you guys have probably taken a road trip, right? You guys have gone on a trip and kind of plotted out your path, but it's amazing how many people start this or come to us and say, hey, we need a new intranet. And my first question is, well, why do you need a new intranet? What does an intranet mean to your organization? Is that document management? Is that collaboration? Is there a social aspect? Is it all of the above? What does that really mean, right? So the second thing is kind of defining your why. Defining why are you doing this? What problems are we trying to solve? What would happen if we didn't do this? Why have other projects struggled in our organization? What is going on? And really plotting out not only the how and kind of all those pieces in our users, but why are we actually doing this? Not just for the sake of, hey, 2016 SharePoint's out and we need to go do SharePoint, or this new product's out and it's new and shiny, let's go do that, right? We've got to know why we're doing it. I love this saying. I use it all the time. You really can't find your way until you discover your why. I think that's all across all of life, right? Not just in business, but also personally as well. It's so true when we work with clients with SharePoint, intranets, even non-SharePoint, is that if you don't understand why you're doing it, one, you're never going to be able to tell your users why you're doing it, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and you'll just be lost. You'll just be wandering the whole way and never really know when you get there and why you're going there, right? So you'll always be lost at sea if you can't define that. I'd mentioned this earlier, but at the end of the day, I like to think of an intranet as a bridge, right? It's a bridge between an organization and its people. So I think there's a couple ways you can look at this. One, you connect people to each other, right? You give them a place where they can come in, they can share knowledge, they can connect, they can grow from each other, and you also connect people to what's going on. We have a lot of internal communications, maybe that are on this webinar as well, that are wanting to communicate better across really fragmented organizations that have offices all over the world, right? We see that all the time. And when you start to connect people and start to bring people together, what you get is this engagement and this adoption, right? People start to use it and start to feel like, wow, this is really cool. I'm actually getting something out of this. But the thing to keep in mind is it's not automatic. And I don't know how many of you guys have a formal adoption plan. Only 1 in 6 organizations actually has a formal adoption plan for how are we going to get people to use this, and sustainability, and how we're going to keep people using it to make sure it's kind of ongoing. But there's one more thing, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, there's one more thing that I think will help build this bridge. And really, no matter how much you connect people to each other, to the org, you've got to connect them to the vision for why you're doing what you're doing. And we've seen this dramatically change engagement, adoption, people using the system, people getting on board, people that didn't want to change, all of a sudden changing. There was even a study that came out last year that looked at over 300 organizations over the course of a year and asked them a bunch of things and found that the #1 change driver within those organizations was a sense of why, connection to why am I actually changing it? Why was I doing it this way and now I'm doing it this way? Why am I doing that? And so people really won't care how they're doing something until they know why they're actually supposed to be doing that. So it's really something interesting to kind of keep in mind and make sure that we're always looking out and keeping our people at the center for sure. And then the last thing I want to talk about is kind of if you're taking the cross-country trip, how do you know when you've actually gotten there, right? How do you know when you've arrived at your new destination? What are the boxes that you check? I know that I pulled into my hotel in California and that's how I arrived. A lot of organizations start out on this journey of building an intranet with no real clear measurement of how they know when they've succeeded. You know, what are you trying to solve? You know, am I trying to make it where people send less attachments so they go there for their documents? Am I trying to make it where people share information and don't have to send as many emails and can kind of use that to gather information? What am I trying to use it for product development? Whatever it is, right? So what does done look like? And you know, defining what that looks like, because if you can't define what done looks like, how are you going to measure when you're done? How are you going to know when you've reached your destination, and how are you going to know that? So a big thing we see a lot of organizations, they try to measure, they try to start, but knowing where you are today, right? Knowing what is your baseline? How well does your intranet work today? A lot of organizations say they want a new intranet, but they don't know if their current intranet is bad, other than people just saying, yeah, it doesn't really work and these kind of things. How do you measure that? And you need to know where you're starting from so you'll know if you've improved, how much you've improved, those kind of things. So making sure you've got clear measurements. And the last thing is kind of making sure that once you do get it out there, making sure you get good feedback from your users. And I'll talk about that later on. We've got a tool for that to make sure that people understand, you know, and you get good feedback from your users on what they think of the progress of the solution. And it's great to measure, and it's great to kind of see how things are going, but take it one step further and really know how you're doing, right? Know how you're doing with everything, and then when you know, then you can know how to improve, right? So measure, see where we are, how have we improved, and then what does that mean? What does it mean when we've actually gone through this process? What does it mean that, you know, people aren't using it as well as they should? Those kind of things going through it. So this is kind of the overall kind of high level I want to talk about, these 4 things. But I want to go one step further and kind of make it even easier. And these 4 things really become something that looks more like this. And so if you can't remember anything else, you can remember LUCK, right? It spells L-U-C-K. Listen to your users, understand why you're doing this, connecting people to each other and to the organization, and then knowing how you've done on that. And we've actually gone so far to kind of trademark this, and we use this across all different kinds of implementations, not just intranets, and we call it the LUCK principle. And it's really amazing how many times you can apply this, and it's easy to remember, and I'll recap it and show it a little bit later on as well. But just remember these 4 things: listen, understand, connect, and know. If you can conquer those 4 buckets, you're on your way. So let's spend the remaining time now going through the next 30 minutes or so, going through 10 areas, you know, and unpacking these 4 areas into 10 kind of practical tips that you guys can apply and hopefully take back to your organization and start to see some real change with. So how many of you guys, I'd asked this question earlier, but really think about it. I mean, how many of you guys can know how many millennials are in your organization? Do you know your makeup of your employees? Do you know how many are millennials? Do you know how many are baby boomers, Gen X? What are they? And how many use mobile to check email or to visit the internet? Do you have those statistics? And a lot of people really don't. And I could go on and on. There's tons of these statistics. And so we see a lot of organizations starting down this path and building an intranet, but they really don't know who their users are. Yeah, they may know that we've got IT. That's usually what it starts with, right? We've got our org chart, and we've got IT, and we've got HR, and we've got these departments. But who are the people inside those? How do they really work? Let's dig a little deeper and get down to that. And so really understanding what they need. So we use user stories is one way we do that. A lot of people use user stories in various ways. But real quick example is, you know, as a road warrior, I need a place to easily log my travel expenses. share them with the accounting team, and then being reimbursed as quick as possible. So just going through and developing user stories about what your individual users need. When we're working with clients, we even go so far as to especially if they're an older generation and have kids, and especially teenager kids, we try to understand where they've come from, because what we found is that age is not a good indicator of adoption. And a lot of people think, hey, the older generations, they're not going to adopt it. My 85-year-old grandmother got on Facebook this year, and so she's on Facebook sending things out, using emoticons and all these kind of things. It's crazy to see that, but it really happened because one of my aunts and her daughters actually helped her, and younger, and got her on there and everything like that. So we've actually seen a correlation between people that have teenage kids, and they're much more savvy sometimes than even other people that may be even younger. So know who your users are. Do they have kids? How old are their kids? How often are they on it? How many devices do they have? Are they at home watching sitcoms and on their iPad? They may be, those kind of things. People don't dig that deep, and so there's a lot to it. What do they value? What do your users value? Get to know them. How do they work? For example, when they need a new computer password, is that an HR thing or is that an IT thing? Where do they go? What is their thought process? Not what you think, but what do your users do? Take a survey. Those kind of things go a long way. Define your personas. That's a big thing that we always try to do. Make sure you're defining who your people are, and it kind of goes along with that as well. We've got facilitation methodologies that we help organizations with them with that as well. And one thing we found to be across the board, no matter what you do, as you're getting to know your users, get them involved, because people will always support what they help create. Happens all the time. People are always going to get involved, and there's this psychological piece of, hey, I've had a piece in that. I've got a vested interest now in that succeeding, and it's amazing when you build out your team and get your entire company on board and involved. They don't have to be all on every single project meeting, but ask them things, give little feedbacks, get people talking about it. It's amazing how far that goes to build adoption and build excitement and build engagement as we go along. How many of you guys have ever received bad directions, right? You've gotten bad directions, and you probably you eventually got there, right, over time, but it may have took you longer to get there, but they weren't great directions. And how you organize your content in your intranet is how your users navigate and get directions to what they need. And so there's a shift going on. If you guys are doing an intranet now or have an intranet, and I know a few more people have joined us since we did the poll as well, but where you are in your process matters, and it doesn't matter, to me, it doesn't matter where you are. If something's broke, there's always a chance to fix it, right? It doesn't mean, oh, well, we've gone too far. I don't think there's ever a point where you've kind of gone too far. You just have to manage that change. And we see a lot of people doing bad navigation and giving bad directions, if you will, inside their intranets. But there's hope. Like I said, you can change at any time, and you can kind of step back and get feedback and understanding how your users really want to do it. So what I want to do is I want to share kind of 4 areas, 4 tactics that we're kind of using today, and four things. And there's always new things popping up, but these are really 4 that I think are really going a long way, and we see a lot of impact from these as we go forward. So let's just start on the top left there with mega menus. I don't know if you guys have heard these. I'll show you a couple examples of these in just a few minutes. But rather than add so many top-level items, make it simple. Make it easy to drill down. I'll talk about simplicity in just a minute. I won't steal too much of my thunder. But people don't want a huge amount of information to kind of sift through. We've changed. We've got this digital noise now I talked about early on, where we've got so much distraction. We don't have time to kind of to spend time figuring out where we're trying to go. So give them a few top-level items. We even say somewhere between 4 and 7, 5 to 7 top-level menu items, and then have them drill down. Open up a mega menu, and I'll show you, like I said, an example of that in a minute. Task-oriented groupings, right? So this is where I said, ditch the org chart. And I know this is a different way of thinking altogether, and don't hear me wrong, we've still got clients that are using the org chart. Sometimes that makes the most sense for the type of organization, how it's structured, the culture, whatever it is. But we've actually seen it work better a lot of times when you don't use the org chart to manage and to structure your navigation. So what I'm talking about here is when you guys, if our goal is cross-departmental, right, and collaboration across the environment, I don't know about you, we're a smaller organization, we're not thousands and thousands of people, but even for large organizations, my guess is most of you guys work across departments, right, at some point. and you're not just within your department. So when you go to SharePoint or you go to your intranet, are you thinking, well, I just got to go to my IT department site and do this? Most of the time that's starting to break down, and we want it to break down. We want that. There's so much more innovation and things that come out of cross-departmental collaboration. So if we're doing that, then why are we still structuring things in these silos of departments, right? We're still structuring our intranets and everything as if, you know, people are going and clicking on the department and their IT site. So we've started trying to structure things more for task-oriented grouping. So, hey, I'm working on a project. Well, let's go to the project type site. So focus it more on the task rather than the department or the topic, if that makes sense. What are you there to do? You're not there to do IT or do HR. You're there to enter expenses, share information, be social, whatever it is. So grouping things in that way makes a huge difference. And we've seen a mixed approach as well, part departmental, but part also this kind of task-oriented grouping. You just got to find what's right, and that's kind of part of the planning process. Action-oriented labels. So I'll show you an example of this a little later on as well. But this is really easy, to be honest. This is just simply going in and changing how you call things, changing your language from being just something that's very static, like we've always called it, to an actual action of what the user is actually trying to do. It's amazing to see engagement, and we do heat mapping to see where users are clicking, how many more clicks things get once you have action-oriented labels. And the last thing is just all these technologies, intranets today, can tell you what the most popular items are in the top areas and most clicks and things like that. Pull those to the top, because most likely those are things that people are looking for as well. Do something with that. So again, using the data that we've got in all these systems and all these very sophisticated platforms on who's doing what, use that data to actually make the navigation and make getting around a little easier. So I'll show you a couple examples of these. So I mean, these are both public sites. I just wanted to show them something everybody could get to and they could look at for these two sites. And also, you see Starbucks on here. I use this as an example because a lot of people don't think to go to their public, their public-facing websites of some of their most favorite, brands, and look at how they're doing things. Because you know what? Starbucks has spent many tens of hundreds of millions of dollars probably on their user interface, user experience, customer experience. I guarantee it, right? Why not leverage what they've done? If they're doing something, they've probably put a lot of thought behind that, right? Just because it's a coffee house, how are they navigating things? How are they moving things around? It's really a good idea just to go out there and see what other people are doing. But these are examples of mega menus, right? You can see the Euro furniture has 6 items up there at the very top. You click, you just hover over one, it shows you these big expanded. That's how we want to, gather information. That's how we want to consume information these days because we've got so much. We need to be able to tell, and make a decision really quickly on what we need. When I talk about action-oriented links, this is what I'm talking about here. So here's the old way of thinking about this, right? So you've got things, and you could come up with a ton of these, right? So mileage claims, PTO requests, support, people search, I mean, all the normal things that we normally see. Here's what it would look like to change that to an action-oriented label. Get your expenses reimbursed, request time off, fill out a support ticket for immediate help, find out about your coworkers. And again, just adding those things makes people click on them more and gets people to be engaged, helps people understand that's actually what I'm there to do. That's actually telling me what the action is that it's going to help me do. So it's amazing to see what happens when you kind of change from just plain old labels to action-oriented labels. Go through all of your labels on all your buttons, on all your links, and do an exercise where you say, how can we take this from the old label to the action-oriented? I think you'll see results just from that one thing alone. So how many of you guys use just a single application every single day? Come into work and that's the only thing you use every day, right? I think those days are long gone. When we come in, use the green screen, that's all we use every day. I mean, we're using tons of applications, and I'm the same way, right? There was a stat that came out, this was ZDNet, that actually said that the average number of applications that we use per week is about 25 applications. So we're using that many on average per week. Some people use a lot more, some people use less, but on average we're using 25 different applications. So the last thing we need is for our intranet to be yet another silo, another application where information lives. Because I bet in every single one of your organizations, you've got information over here that's duplicated probably here, and maybe parts of it are over here, and I've got to go here to see this, and it's just spread all over the place, right? And so a lot of people don't think about this when they go forward with it, and they think it's going to cost too much money and those kind of things. But again, the most successful organizations use their intranet as a bridge to connect these islands of information. and you've got information in all these different applications. And the intranet can start to be that place where you start to bring those things into dashboards and bring some of that information in. Start slowly. You don't have to do everything at one time, but start slowly to try to integrate, because integration really does add value. It makes people like it more. It gives them one place to go to get things. It makes it easy, and it goes a long way. So integration is one of those ones that that a lot of people don't think about, but it's really important just to think about what are some other things we could show in here that relate to what we're doing. Maybe it's project management, and we're using this project management application over here. How do we tie that in? We've done some of that for ourselves as well. CRM, ERP, reporting, dashboards, whatever it may be. Even if it's as simple as making your search your external partner sites as well. Just little things like that go a long way, so that someone doesn't have to go to Google to search versus also searching internally. Make it search both, and there's really easy ways to do a lot of that kind of thing. How many of you still? I ask a lot of questions, and I know you guys can't respond back. You're welcome to respond back if you want to, but really, what I want to do is get you guys thinking as we go through this, because I think there are a lot of questions, and I think it's good for us to kind of think differently about things. But how many of you guys still like to sit in long day-long trainings, right? 1 or 2 day long trainings. How many of you guys even still go to those, or your company still pays for you to sit in those long trainings, right? Well, we've seen that changing, and again, it goes back a lot of times to how many people are and how many applications we've got, and how the digital noise we've got everywhere affecting our attention span, right? We've got this 8-second attention span, so every 8 seconds our brain is switching to something else and trying to remember what's going on. So we've actually seen training and communication have to change dramatically with how we adopt these. And please don't tell me that you just rolled out your intranet and you just told everybody to go out there and it's so intuitive they could just learn to use it. I'm sure you guys had some way, or are going to hopefully have some way of getting people up to speed, communicating what it's about. How do you use this? Where do I go? When do I use it? When do I don't use it? What is it good for? Those kind of things. I'll give you a good example from one of our clients, and we didn't charge them for this, but I wanted to get some anecdotal evidence. So we set up 2-day training. We did all the normal things you would normally go through, where we had breaks every hour or two, fed them, all that kind of stuff. Made it really easy. Did hands-on, so they would have hands-on in addition to kind of training. And went through a process of like getting up to speed. It was their new intranet launch, all these kind of things, handouts, the whole 9 yards, everything you would expect from a great training course. Then on the 3rd day, we had one of our senior consultants there on site. We said, hey, he'll be in the conference room all day. Whatever questions, nothing is off the limit. Whatever questions you have, please come ask this question. So he tracked those questions and everything. What we found out was that 90% of the questions that he got were things that he covered in the previous 2 days of training. And so it was amazing to us to see that, hey, no matter how much we train these people and these employees, when they're sitting through these courses, they're not retaining it. That's not the way to do it. So you've got to start thinking differently about how you communicate and how you train your people. And so there's a lot of different tactics to this, and I'll show you a couple. I like, again, easy things for you guys to remember, but I call this prepare and proclaim, right? So the prepare part is the training, right? So making sure that we know how we're going to teach these people to use this, right? So you can see all those up there on the screen, the early adopters, making sure that you know, again, knowing your users, who's an early adopter, who wants to adopt it. The one there in the middle is the big one I want to talk about, because we've got to shift our thinking, and we deliver things now. We call it just in time, call it bite-sized training, contextual training, whatever you want to call it, contextual help. And there are a lot of things out there for all different kinds of tools. I know they've got them for SharePoint as well, that will deliver help when you need it. So a lot of people think, hey, I'll just throw out a knowledge base. There's 300 links to Microsoft on this page. Go search for it and figure out what you need. And that just doesn't work. No one wants to go sift through that, because when I'm in SharePoint or I'm in my intranet working, I have a specific, I'm there for a reason, or I'm not there just hanging out most of the time. Even if it is from social, I'm there because I'm working on this project or whatever it may be. So if I'm trying to, let's say, restore a previous version of a document, I want to know about restoring that document. I don't want to have to search through document management and libraries and lists and how to set views and all these other things, right? So make sure your training is really focused, and we do short 2 to 5 minute videos now that we release with people. We do very short trainings. We do lunch and learns, ongoing things to help people, tip sheets about document libraries so they can quickly flip to things and figure out what it is. We've got to, again, taking into account that our attention spans are lower and that people don't have time to go through all this information. We've got to deliver it differently. And then, starting early and repeating regularly. This is, again, putting a process in place for lunch and learns, for ongoing training, and making sure that, again, there's a process. A lot of people think that, you can do a training event at the launch of your intranet, and that's how, it's really how it's always been done, right? We just do this big training event, and at the end of that event, what happens when you hire 10 people the next week after the event happened? How do those people get trained? What about 100 people the next year? And we have one client hiring 1,000 people a year. They were growing that fast. How do those 1,000 people even know where to go in SharePoint? What is SharePoint? So what is your process for continuing to get these people up to date? And some of that's with your champions and ambassadors. You can see there on the right side, making sure that you're kind of sharing and spreading the news, developing and building excitement around this, and figuring out who's really on the team and who's not. And then the last thing there, helping users understand why. I mentioned that earlier, helping them connect to the vision for why are you actually doing this will help them get on board and go further. I'll talk about that in a second. So there's a really interesting stat that came from Clearbox talking about almost half employees say that insufficient training is really a barrier, right? This is why we're not adopting these new technologies, and it goes there. But I'll say this, and I showed this before, and I'll go back to it again because I think it's that important. Doesn't matter how much you train them, doesn't matter how much time you spend on training and teaching them how to use the tools. If I don't know why I'm using a screwdriver versus a hammer or this tool versus that tool, then I'm not going to use it. I don't know why I'm using it, right? Why do I need to do that? So helping people, again, connecting them to the vision for why they're using that. So the older I get, the more and more I think that this is so relevant, right? And I realize the truth behind this statement of less is more. And we're overwhelmed with kind of the abundance and so much technology these days, and digital noise and inputs and just so many things going on that it's easy to just get caught up in just all the bells and whistles, right? And we see organizations do it all the time when they're thinking about putting out new technology, especially if you're thinking about things like Office 365 or anything like that, where there's so many tools and technologies. Let's just use them all. Let's use Yammer and this and that and the other. And really, we've kind of gotten away from that. So the old way of thinking, one of the old ways of thinking, to kind of put this practically, is we used to minimize clicks, right? If you've been around kind of the web world at any given time, it used to be, hey, no more than 2, maybe 3 clicks or something to get to something. But that thinking isn't always best. We're learning from that thinking isn't always the right way to go about it. We shouldn't always do that. And so what I want to do is kind of go through and talk about what I'm calling the ABCs, right, of less is more. And we'll talk through these pretty quickly, and I'll show you a couple examples of these. So the first one, A, is for attention span. So I use this 2-second rule. I think there's probably been some studies on this as well that says a user determines where they're going to go next and what they're going to do from a web standpoint within 2 seconds. So can your users right now, if you answer this question, can your users go to your intranet, go to any page, and within 2 seconds figure out where they want to go next, if it's their first time there? Now, again, if they've been there a bunch of times, they kind of know and probably have it bookmarked and remember where it is. But could a new user go to your site and figure out where they wanted to go within 2 seconds? What was relevant, what wasn't? Use that as your new users that come in. Ask them. See if people are able to do that. So attention span. We've got to be able to deliver information quickly, succinctly, with no more noise in our way. Bite-sized delivery, right? This is something else that is kind of goes along with the mega menus I mentioned earlier, but really thinking in this terms of bite, snack, and then meal. So at first we want to give them a bite, right? We show them just a few menu items, and then the snack is I got the mega menu and I can kind of snack on all these different things. And then when I click on that, it takes me to a lot more content. So building on your content, building in drill down to say I'm going to start small, I'm going to click into more information, I'm going to click into more. That's where I said about the clicks doesn't matter now. If it takes 6 clicks, people actually prefer that now rather than having so much information on the top level. It's pretty interesting. You see a lot of websites now, they're really long, all this scrolling. Scrolling used to be a big no-no, and now you scroll all the way down because it's just chunks of information that go all the way down the page. And we want to get things in these chunks. So think about things in these chunks of bite-sized information. And then I can't say enough about consistency, right? So the more familiar it is, the more findable it'll be. We see clients coming to us all the time that have tried to do intranets and they're struggling with them and not getting things out. and every single department site and every single site that you go to has a different color, a theme. The navigation's on the right, it's on the left, it's on the top, it's all over. Come up with consistency. Make it consistent, throughout. Make the user experience consistent. People will know what to expect on each page. Oh, this works like that. Even if things are in different places at some point further down, make sure they work the same way, if that makes sense. So if this menu looks like it should drop down, make sure it still drops down, because that's what it did over here. So consistency breeds familiarity, right? And then that makes things more findable, more intuitive, and more engaging. So show a couple examples, right, of some extremes here to kind of talk through this. You got our favorite here up in the top left corner, the Google, right? The kings of less is more. You go to their site, no frills, you got a big search box. That's what you're here for, right? You're here just to search, put in your search terms, and then you see up in the top right and the lower left and lower right, you've got kind of things tucked away. If you want to do more, go here. A lot of people are using this app launcher, these little squares up here in the top right to kind of launch things. But again, I'm there to search, so I don't need all these other things in my way. If you look over here on the White House site, you'll see how they've kind of done it. So they've got, 5 items on the top, and then I like how they did their search there. They've got 5 items. Issues, that's a byte, right? It's really high level, just a byte. You open that up, now you've got a snack. All right, so here's some of the top issues. All right, what else is there? Here's some of the popular topics we talked about earlier. You click on that, then you get your meal, then you get your information. So starting really high level, drilling down slowly as you go through this. Not a ton of information, again, bombarding you on the top site, helping you kind of get to what you need to get to over time as we go through that. How many of you guys have an intranet or your file shares that look like this? Looks like this library, right? Things turned every which way, not organized. It's just a mess. And we have a lot of clients actually that want to help with organizing their content, and really they've got just a mess within their intranets as well. And how many of you guys actually know what ROT is? R-O-T. I've heard that term before. A lot of people haven't heard that term. So let me talk about that for just one second. So ROT stands for redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And so you guys know what these mean. I won't go into the details of what redundant, obsolete, and trivial mean. But what we do is part of our process, and we've got kind of these content cleanup services that we actually offer for clients as part of their intranet projects, where we'll go through and especially if it's a migration, figuring out what goes into these buckets. What is redundant? What is obsolete? What is trivial? And I'll be honest, the hardest one is the trivial thing. Redundant and obsolete, those are pretty easy to figure out, right? If something hasn't been used, if it's a duplicate, those kind of things. Trivial is interesting because you've got to define for your organization, what does trivial mean, right? What does that actually mean within my organization? What makes something trivial or not? And is trivial the same for this department versus that department, or this team versus that team? Do they all think trivial is the same thing? So trying to figure those things out. But if you can take this ROT, R-O-T, and it's a good way to remember it, if you can take that and try to think about, again, where do we have things in these buckets? How are things in there? And what's that going to cost me? And I'll talk about the cost for just one second. So a lot of people think, hey, I've got so much extra content, things that are redundant, obsolete, or trivial. It's probably going to cost a lot to store that, right? They think first like storage cost, maintenance of that. If you're online in the cloud, what are the storage to store all the stuff we don't really need? But I'll tell you something bigger than that it leads to. So we've seen ROT actually lead to this, and see if you guys have had this situation come up. The more outdated and bad content you have, the worse our search results are, right? And so we can't find things, or we have to sift through a lot of noise. There's 5,000 items in this document library, in this list, or these documents that I can't get to, and I have to sift through it, sort, filter, try to figure out which one's the right one, open them up, whatever it is, right? It slows us down. It makes it harder to find things. Well, that leads to frustration, right? Well, I can't find things anymore. So guess what happens when I do finally find it? Well, I'm going to store that locally on my desktop. Don't tell IT, right? I'm going to store that on my desktop so that I can have that later, because I don't want to go through that pain again of finding it. If it changes, well, I'll try to figure that out later. But for now, I'm not going to go. I'm going to store it locally, or I'm going to store it in Dropbox or some other cloud that even exposes your organization to something else. So the cost is actually the least of your worries. It's really, what is this actually driving from an adoption, from an engagement, from a frustration standpoint? You'd be amazed at what bad content actually leads to. So I'll ask you guys a question, out loud. Do you guys know how much ROT you have? Have you guys even ever thought about that? How much bad content do we have? I'll give you one stat out there that this was AIIM did a study on this. they said the average company considers about 58% of their content to be rot, 58%, and the European Commission actually did an audit last year. I was reading an article on this just in the last week or two, and they actually removed 80% of their online content from the European Commission because it was outdated and considered rot in their terms. So 80-something% for them. The average company says 58%. If you cut that in half, 29, 30%, being very conservative of your content is probably rot. What is that causing for your users? What frustration is that causing? So as we kind of round this out and kind of on the home stretch here with these, we all like to be involved, right? We all like to be heard. We all like to be involved. We all want to have a say in kind of what we're doing. And we talked about engaging users, but this is specifically talking about giving them a voice after you quote unquote maybe go live, and giving them a platform and a safe way to be able to respond and ask questions and give you feedback. So make it easy for users to tell you what they think. And by that I don't mean, you know, hey, when you have a question or have some feedback, go email support@company.com or enter a ticket in our help desk system, and that'll be great feedback, and we'll appreciate doing that. Because I can tell you, if I'm working in my intranet and I'm doing something, I don't have time to go out, fill out a form in my help desk system, or go send Bob an email in IT about some feedback or something like that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to keep it myself, keep on trucking, and just not worry about it because it's not in the flow. So one of the things we did was we actually built this tool. And if you guys want this, you can go to c5insight.com, and there'll be a download, and I'll let you guys download this if you want. It's free. It's working on SharePoint right now, so if you got a SharePoint intranet, you can use it. But use the concept on something else, and we've done this for other things as well. But what happens is when you're in SharePoint, it adds this feedback button on every page, and you can do it on different sites. When you click that as you're navigating around your site, it pops a dialog box right there you see in the middle, puts the page that the user's on right there, and within a couple seconds they can hit submit feedback, they hit send, and it goes into a list where then you can set workflows, you can set you know, alerts, someone can review it, your steering committee, people can actually see what feedback. This has been dramatic in increasing adoption and just getting feedback, because before there was no feedback, no one would ever reach out or enter a ticket unless it was like something was broken. Now, throughout the site, we're getting people that are saying, hey, you know, this is good, I like the way this is laid out, but it was really hard to get to this section or that section, whatever it is. It takes no time, it's right there in the flow, they don't leave the page they're on, it's a really quick way. And there are other ways to do these kind of things. We built this one, it's kind of quote unquote quick and dirty, I would call it, but it does a great job and our clients love it. So we're going to give it away to you guys on there as well. So if you go to the downloads page on our website, you can get that. It's a great tool, and I would hope that all of you guys would have some way, and just to think about this, if nothing else, and you're not using SharePoint, think about how can we make it easy for people to give us feedback, because your users are what it's about, right? They're the ones that matter the most. This one often takes people by surprise when I talk about it, because governance is such a hot topic now. You guys probably all remember a little firm called Enron a few years ago that we have a lot to thank them for from a compliance and regulatory standpoint, right? But governance is a huge topic. It's a big topic, especially for a lot of our clients that are with compliance and, like I said, regulations. And we agree. We spend a lot of time on governance, building governance plans. We've actually even got a governance toolkit with a bunch of templates in it if someone wants just kind of a do-it-yourself kind of template piece. You can find that on our website as well. But governance is huge. But here's what I think's happened. Over time, I think we've kind of taken this to the extreme. I even wrote a blog about this within the last 2 or 3 weeks. Called Has Your Governance Gone Too Far? You can find it on our website as well if you want to read more about kind of in-depth about this one tip here. But really, I think people have gone to the extreme of whether it's security, whether it's how they you know, set things up, whatever it is in their intranet, and actually made it more difficult to collaborate because of all in the name of kind of governance, right? And I'll show you what we mean for that, right? It's impacting a lot of different areas. But I call this kind of flexible at the edges, rigid at the core. And so every organization has their core, right? They have their core, their non-negotiables, the things that they have to do, right? Our retention policies, our auditing for our legal. Maybe it's the homepage content on our intranet that's got to go through an approval process because everybody sees it. Maybe who moderates social. We've got things and we've got strict ways to kind of do this is our core. But we see a lot of people take this and apply it throughout their entire organization and throughout their entire intranet. So when you get out to kind of these social communities that are meant to be kind of ad hoc, come and go over a course of weeks or months, people just doing project stuff, and you can see all the things there. it's so rigid and it's so restrictive that they just can't work the way they want to work. So when you've got, you know, your 23, 24, 25-year-olds working with your 56-year-olds or working differently in different ways, they want to set things up a little bit differently. When your HR is working with your you know, logistics team or your legal team or whatever, they want to work a little bit differently. Let those guys work how they need to work, and let them, you know, be empowered to kind of do what they need to do at those levels. Make sure your core is covered, but when you get out to the edges and out to these other, you know, collaboration team sites, don't restrict it so much. Let people do what they need to do, and it's amazing what will happen for adoption and everything as you kind of go forward with that. So as we kind of, again, come to the end, you know, I talked about kind of going cross country and kind of having a driver and everything, and taking a trip earlier. But I'll ask another question. I mean, how many of you guys own a home, right? And so for most of you guys that own a home, how many of you guys have run out of projects to do at your home? You have no more projects to do, right? And I'm the same way. We have tons of things that are ongoing. And I use that analogy because that's really the same way it is with SharePoint and with an intranet in general. You know, again, using the analogy of cross country, it's okay to set the cruise control. It's okay to kind of make it easier, automate some processes, make sure we're not, you know, getting to stretch a little bit and making it a little easier on us. But someone's got to be driving, right? Someone's always got to have their hands on the wheel. And a social platform like an intranet, where it's meant to be kind of evolving, I mean, you saw the stat of how much our people are changing, our organizations are changing over time. That's not going to stop. We're going to continue evolving, people working remote. So, you know, all these things are changing. Is your intranet changing with those? Is it evolving? Is it going forward? Do you have a process so that it's never finished, so that you're ongoing with that, right, and keep on going? One of the ways that we actually do this is putting together a steering committee or a leadership team of some sort. AIM, again, as part of one of their studies they did a year or two ago, had this stat that basically said that, hey, just by having a multi-departmental collaboration, you know, steering committee, your collaboration project, intranet project, will have a 30% increase in success. So one easy way, just by having someone that's always in the driver's seat. So if you guys look at your project right now, is there someone constantly driving it, or is it, hey, we'll just respond as people reach out and say something, or yeah, we haven't done that in a while? I had somebody come up to me at a conference one time that I was speaking at and said, you know, I think our honeymoon phase is over. And I said, well, when was the last time you guys got together and started talking to her a little bit? And she said, oh, we haven't met really as a team since it went live. We just let people use it. And I said, well, that might be part of your problem. So they just kind of set it and forget it, right? And just kind of left it alone. And when you do that, it just starts to die immediately, because people and the way we work and what we're doing is changing. You've got to make sure you're evolving with that. Make sure you've got a process for managing your rot, right? How are we going to get rid of that? How are we making sure that search is still bringing back stuff? How are we addressing the feedback that people have to make this thing better over time? The last thing I'll touch on as we kind of close out is, you know, thinking evolution and not revolution. And really, it serves us all well, I think, in life. But I know everything today, I'd mentioned it before, says go, 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 new technology, shiny, shiny, go as fast as we can, disruption, all those kind of things. But here's what I'll tell you. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And I can guarantee your intranet won't be built in a day either. It's not going to happen overnight. And, you know, you don't have to boil the ocean, right? You don't have to do everything at one time. You should think of it kind of, again, as more of a marathon than a sprint, right? So you think of it as this ongoing process, not like, hey, we've got to have this revolutionary big bang of our new intranet. Roll things out slowly. There's a process and a way that will be really successful when you do that. So start with your foundation, and then rock by rock, layer it up, build your intranet for the people, with the people, by the people, and go through that process. You know, how to process, plan, prioritize, build, refine, those kind of things. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you guys know the Nielsen-Norman group, but they've been around since the mid-90s and kind of the leading experts in especially intranets and user experience and those kind of things. They had a study, I think it was just last year, this new study came out. Every year they do a study on the winning intranet designs, and as part of that study they figure out how big the teams are. It's a really great study if you want to go get it from the Nielsen-Norman group. But this year's, you know, the winning intranets, how big the teams were. The interesting thing to me was how long it took. So the average time, some were longer, some were a little bit shorter, but the average time for someone that made it to this award-winning intranet that was really great, engaging, was on average 18 months that they spent on their intranet development. So a year and a half. Some spent as high as 3 years building their intranet to get this engagement. And some of you guys saying, oh my gosh, you know, that we can't afford that. But remember, it's not 18 months of like nonstop 40 hours a week working on it, right? but it's just taking the process, taking it slow, brick by brick, rock by rock, building it slowly, making sure we're knowing our users. How are they going to work? How do they want to work? And going through that process together. And so another way, is to just think about it in small steps, right? Because every step you take toward your destination, your small steps are going to add up to big wins. Just make sure you're always moving forward in the right direction, right? If you're going from point A to point B and you know clearly what your point B is, as long as you're taking steps toward your point B, as slow as they may seem or be, and you're communicating with your users, you're going to make it to your point B. You're going to make it to your destination. So as we kind of go through this, I want to recap real quick in the next 3-4 minutes, what we were talking about and how we're going through this. So we've got the 4 things luck on here, and this is a good shot if you guys want to. We'll have this up online, and we'll send all of you guys a link to download the slides and everything. But if you want to screenshot this, so this kind of shows what the 10 items are that I want you guys to go through and kind of follow, right? So you've got them all there up on the screen. Think about these in your own way. I know they're not all going to apply to everything that every one of you guys is doing, but make sure that you kind of go through, use them as a checklist, right? And just make sure, hey, are we managing our ROT? Have we even thought about it? Does anybody in our organization even know what that means? Maybe go back and use that as your next party. Talk about ROT a little bit. That'd be a fun thing to do, right? So so you can use that and go forward with that. And as we close, I love this quote. I've actually got it on the back of my Surface on my laptop, and it really is at the heart of where this session came from. We've been doing things the same way for a long time. Things are changing around us. We talk about digital transformation, digital disruption. Are we changing with them, right? Is your intranet changing with them? Is the way you're approaching your people changing with them? Or are we trying to do things the same old way, right? So we've got to approach things differently. We've got to try things differently, and I hope that you've got some ideas from this session on how to approach those in a different way. Appreciate your time. If you guys want to reach out, again, my information is, you can reach me at curtis@c5insight.com. Feel free to reach me at c5curtis on Twitter. Here's our information. We've got tons of webinars going on every single month, 1, 2, 3 webinars a month on Intranet, SharePoint, all kinds of things. There are tons of blogs out there. Please reach out. Please ask any questions you've got, and if there's anything we can do for you guys, we'll be happy to do that. So thank you for your time. I'll hang out here for a few minutes and see if any questions come in. And we just appreciate you guys being on. Thank you.